Thank you for that very nice welcome, and thank you to you and your colleagues at the Board of Trade for the enormous support that you've given to Olympic projects for the past 20 years. It's made an enormous difference for us to be able to keep the city and the region fully engaged in what we've been talking about. I'm excited today to have a chance to explain the thinking behind the idea of hosting again in 2030, so I'll get right to it. So on July the 2nd, 2003 in Prague at 5:30 p.m. in the afternoon, IOC member Dennis Oswald passed a sealed envelope over to IOC President Jacques Rogge, confirming the result of the audited bid process for the 21st Olympic Winter Games. Dr. Rogge opened the envelope in a tension-filled hall of exhausted bid campaign teams from Austria, Korea, and Canada, and delivered the following message. I'm honored to announce that the 21st Winter Olympic Games have been awarded to the city of Vancouver. I almost get a shiver up my spine even just saying the words. It was a moment like no other in our history, bringing an end to a campaign that began in 1996. That was the start of a period of massive change and transformation. It touched us all. And if you're not inclined to believe that, then maybe you have an answer as to why on Sunday night, February 28, 2010, Yonge Street in Toronto shut down as countless thousands of Canadians took to the streets to celebrate, as they did in Montreal, Halifax, Calgary, and Vancouver, pretty well everywhere. This is fondly remembered as Gold Medal Sunday. Many just went outside to savor and share the pride they were feeling in what it is to call yourself a Canadian. Over the past 25 years, if I have learned anything, I have learned that if you put the word Olympic in front of anything, it tends to make it bigger, much bigger. The word Olympic can cause confusion. It can make you smile, or frown. It can start an argument, create excitement, inspire us to be better human beings. And of course, there is always the debate about cost. Bottom line, it's a very big deal. We all know it's a big deal because we've experienced this firsthand ourselves. Even here in BC, where our own Olympic credentials are considered to be stellar, the word Olympic has special meaning for just about everyone. We have all lived Olympic in some way. In each of us, it has left something behind. So given that, let me begin today by putting up front that the premise for a 2030 Olympic and Paralympic bid is rooted in the fundamental notion that we can and will use existing facilities and venues and involve new communities. A regional games, a BC Games, there will be no taxpayer money requested for venue construction. We have what we need, indeed more than what we need. However, communities wishing to be included as aspiring venue communities may well petition existing infrastructure schemes or various senior governments for support so they can become compliant with Games needs, or if you prefer, to become Olympic communities. Neither BC or Canada will be asked to spend any money on Games infrastructure, either to build or to convert facilities for Games use, an opposite strategy to 2010. This is not to say that governments may indeed choose to leverage the Games as a catalyst to support and deliver funding for badly needed projects, such as social housing or public transportation. While Olympic and Paralympic Games in 2030 could well benefit from various public infrastructure initiatives, there are other ways to deliver the project. This bid idea, should it proceed, is a huge departure from tradition, especially in respect to cost, with one exception. An agreement with the federal government on security will be required. So the vision for 2030 is a radical shift away from what used to be. Cost, structure, and scope, all very different. The compact plan of 2010 abandoned and replaced by a regional, more inclusive plan that focuses on delivering a province-wide experience and advantage. From 3 communities, as was the case in 2010, to as many as 8 or 9, provided minimum venue and hosting requirements can be achieved in other communities. The 2010 Winter Games operations were 90% private sector funded. The plan for 2030 is that they be 100% private sector funded and deliver a modest surplus. This can be achieved because the financial pressures on the organizing committee will be materially relaxed from 2010. Here are some examples. The process to build the organization can be shortened by years. Some organizing committees, business units such as construction, just won't be needed. Indeed, many business units can be merged or greatly downsized given the precedents already established and the institutional knowledge already in the bank. This is an occasion where history can indeed be our best friend. VANOC was made up of 51 small business units. Assuming a similar base structure for 2030, it's clear the project scope can be less complex, scaled down with shorter timeframes. A smaller organization translated a lot less cost. Why spend significant dollars on planning to build out business units such as legal, technology, marketing, ticketing, communications, government relations, finance, and more when you have a plan in the drawer ready to be refined? In 2010, we started at ground zero. We had it all to do. Organizing committees typically use the full 6.5 years to learn how to run the games. The OCOG grows quickly in the early years as each business unit has to learn their scope of work and recruit significant staff to support and execute their planning. It's a tough process. With the experience that exists now, we do not have to learn the process again. We can bring and experienced people on board when they are needed and not before. This represents a significant cost reduction, given that people is one of the largest costs facing any OCOG. The 2010 Games began as a modest spark of an idea in the late 1990s. It then evolved into an entirely different project due to collaboration, partnership, changing times, emerging needs, and a desire for Canadians everywhere to be included. In that one way, they were uncommon and unprecedented. Building VANOC involved trial and error, massive testing and retesting, and sometimes changes in direction, old ideas replaced by better ideas. With the advantage of experience and existing practices and new technology, many of those early costly procedures can be avoided. No need to learn what we already know. Away from Vancouver and outside of Canada, the global view is that in 2010, Canada and British Columbia generally got it right. It took the best we had to give and a broad commitment to partnership that stretched all the way to Newfoundland. No need to go any further on this, as each of us carries our own unique memory. However, I think we can agree it touched everyone. VANOC promised to manage its budgets deficit-free and delivered on this commitment. While BC guaranteed the Games' financial performance and their delivery, the government guarantee was never called on. Essentially, the government instructed and then trusted VANOC to live within its means, and we did. VANOC's 2010 capital budget and operating budget both showed small surpluses. It's noteworthy that this was achieved against the backdrop of the 2008 and 2009 global financial meltdown. The Auditor General's report following the Games did not state otherwise. VANOC had responsibility to deliver very specific sport infrastructure against a budget of $580 million, all allocated to us equally by the governments of BC and the governments of Canada. We went so far as to put funding in place in the form of a trust to support venues that might later on need financial support to maintain their operations. That trust continues to supply funding to those facilities today. The facilities we built are functioning as planned today. Some of them are considered to be the best in the world today. Around VANOC's operations, the energy and timing of the Games caused projects like the Convention Centre and the Canada Line to be envisioned and fast-tracked by governments and tourism champions. The Vancouver International Airport expansion, the same. This is a universal phenomenon with Olympic Games. They typically cause transformational and thinking and generally deliver badly needed infrastructure in time for the arrival of the world in the host communities. Thinking ahead to the prospect of a 2030 bid, it seemed to us that the current challenges faced by our region and province could greatly benefit from a second Olympics and Paralympics. We need no new sport infrastructure for this. In this regard, we would be the only winter city country ever to present a bid to the IOC that genuinely requires no new venues or targeted venue funding. It is not for us to presume what the region and province does or does not need in the way of community infrastructure. But from a distance, it seems to us like timing and the well-stated critical needs of the region could be aligned with the 2010 Games bid strategy. Vancouver's housing and major infrastructure needs are a matter of public record. The Olympic Games does require athlete accommodation. Typically, for past host cities, this project is conceived and scoped collaboratively between host communities, big governments, and the private sector. The Falls Creek Athletes Village was of unprecedented quality and was to have a very specific post-Games focus. This has been realized. Today, fewer communities in the country are deemed to be more desirable to live in than Falls Creek. While the Games accommodation needs for athletes are generally fairly modest, each country tends to deliver accommodation that best meets its own post-Games requirements. The Games then simply adapt to the available housing configuration and general standard. So, if it was determined that post-Games accommodation was purposed to help deal with very specific affordable housing needs here, then Games would simply adapt to that scenario and plan accordingly. The city's stated plan to deliver between 70 and 80,000 affordable housing units over the next 10 years could, in part at least, be aligned with Olympic needs and timing, resulting in a win-win legacy for housing. The Games, by bringing key partners together, could spark the region's ability to get these units built faster than they otherwise might. Local First Nations were a key and active 2010 Games partner, having participated in all aspects of Games bidding, delivery, and governance. The 4 host nations chiefs were recognized as heads of state, a first for any Olympic Games ever. Given this participation and experience, it seemed very likely to us that First Nations will desire to grow this relationship and may be interested in helping build a housing legacy for post-2030. However, should this not be the case, and should local governments pass on seeking a 2030 Games-inspired housing legacy, then we would seek to find an athletes' village solution using existing accommodation at universities or in hotels, which are now being used by Milan Cortina for 2026. When Vancouver 2010 submitted its bid to the IOC in Prague in 2003, we did not promise the Canada Line or the Convention Centre. At best, what the Games did was influence a multi-stakeholder dialogue. Governments and the YVR came together and the Canada Line was fast-tracked, avoiding the fear of Vancouver looking like a city under construction in 2010. This was a community-first initiative and did not form a central part of VANOC's transportation plan. We had no specific role at all in that development. It was not in our bid or in our plans. We were delighted it was done. It seems reasonable that senior governments might view 2030 through the same lens and present a window of opportunity to push the future Broadway line on up to UBC. Without a catalyst like the Games, this could take decades to achieve, if ever. Bidding for 2030 got its inspiration from evolving plans and discussions around celebrating the 2010 Games. I guess you could say there was some out loud dreaming going on. As a Games bid conversation for 2030 began, the reaction from business and tourism has and continues to be positive, even animated. Media reaction also has and continues to be generally balanced, and polling has been strong. I recall a conversation a year ago with a business leader who asked me for my thoughts on where the next big idea might come from. Well, perhaps 2030 is it. Extending the 2010 legacy to 2030 and beyond seems to resonate, especially given the premise there would be no need for new sport facilities or requests for capital investment. No winter country has ever bid from such a position of strength before. Almost every bid from everywhere has had to carry the burden of a debate about capital cost. The idea here is that the 2030 Games will be funded entirely by the private sector. At the heart of what we propose is to try and double the value and return on our 2010 investments. The Games operating budget of $2+ billion estimate would come from television, sponsorship, IOC marketing, and ticket sales and other forms of fundraising, all driven by the private sector. Most of this money would come from outside BC and be spent here. As was the case in 2010, the tourism advantage would be considerable, and business would likely adapt their planning to take advantage of the broader Games opportunity and reach. For the 2010 bid, there were gloomy economic predictions that never came to pass. Aside from the positive business and economic impacts, I think we would all agree the Games had an enormous impact on community morale, national unity, confidence, and our country's place and profile in the world. We did not suffer an economic hangover. Was it perfect? No. But generally, it was viewed as a time of great pride by most Canadians. For winter sport, it was a coming-of-age event for Canada. In 2010 and 2011, Canada was listed as the world's leading nation brand by Future Brand, much of that credited to the impact and reach and profile of the Olympic Games. For culture and the arts, it was an opportunity to communicate with the rest of the world on our own terms. The pandemic has shattered our spirit and brought with it untold challenges, heartbreak, and great uncertainty. We can only imagine how difficult these past months have been for business leaders. Over the weeks and months since the pandemic began to paralyze our economy, I think we have all become exhausted and are looking for a hopeful way forward, relief. The timing of this Olympic initiative may provide that hopeful spark and give the community an optimistic focus, a confidence boost, a lofty goal we can all rally around, a well-funded COVID rebound and recovery initiative. We have proven that we can deal with and overcome serious adversity. We are a society with a remarkable can-do track record. We have seasoned elected officials at all levels of government. We have countless enlightened business leaders, an army of trained volunteers, very experienced big event talent, and all over the world, we are trusted. There is a we can do anything confidence in BC and a capacity to be the very best in the world. This is not an easy project. It pushes you hard. It asks a lot of you, but well executed, it can render formidable outcomes. It's a force. It parallels the power of 3 Super Bowls a day for 17 days. The human effort required to stage an Olympic and Paralympic Games is well documented. We have that ability. We just need the motivation. We have done the training. To move forward requires that we embrace the idea in a way that inspires vision and confidence. In time, our sport venues will tire and need refurbishing. So this is one of those rare occasions where opportunity and great timing seem to be nicely aligned. Sectors badly damaged by COVID-19 include sport, culture, and tourism. Many long-established vital organizations in these sectors may not survive the pandemic. As was the case in 2010, the Olympic Games and Cultural Olympiad will throw a bright, shining light on sport and culture and help accelerate participation. As a beacon of hope for tourism, the Games can help rebuild an industry that has been decimated. We have tested this idea on tourism executives, on business leaders, and believe that they are ready to embrace this as a recovery catalyst for the coming decade and a key strategy to help us emerge strong from the pandemic, COVID-19. The Canadian Olympic Committee has been consulted and liked the concept of a 2030 bid from BC. They are a force for good in Canada and are highly regarded around the world. Tricia Smith, their president, lives in Vancouver and is herself a celebrated Olympian. Ultimately, it will be the COC that makes the final call and submits any bid for Canada. The IOC is also aware and very enthusiastic about a second bid from BC. So we feel that the door is wide open to us to win if we have the desire to just go for it. You know, it's possible to find all manner of reasons to say no to something, to take a pass, to wait, to put it off. But let's not find resistance or any comfort at all in a view that cost is the issue. It's not the issue. We're not asking for funding to build anything. What we are saying is let's take advantage of what we have and do something truly remarkable and lift our province up while we're doing it. How often will we have an opportunity to invoke the full capability and magic of BC and make history? Not a few of us, all of us. The biggest event in the world in 2030 is in need of an owner. I think we qualify. We are good enough to pull this off. We just need to find the courage. In that regard, our own history is at our disposal. Who we are is who we were. Imagine for 1 second the transformational power of the family of BC uniting as one team to do something grand like this, and the legacy of that achievement delivered by us all. No one left out. Wouldn't that be something? Thank you. Back to you, Bridget.
John, thank you for your passion and enthusiasm. You first raised this in February of 2020, before the pandemic, and you raised it on our stage when we were celebrating 10 years from the 2010 games. A lot has changed in the last year or so, including, and you talked about the impact the pandemic has had on tourism, on sport and culture and the economy generally. I want to start at the beginning, though. I mean, we've got lots of questions. I've got a list of questions. We've got lots of questions from the people who are watching. Let's start first with what your vision is and what you mean by regional games.
So what we mean is that if you actually, when we started talking about this, we just thought, well, let's just do what we did. But when you actually stand back and evaluate that, doing what we did is just really, bringing the same reward, the same exposure, the same experience to the same people. We think the opportunity is bigger, and the rules, the IOC's rules and how the IOC embraces bids has also changed. So we see an opportunity to take this further, to do more, to reach more, and let communities of the province have their own vision and demonstrate their capacity and their ability to become Olympic communities and part of the Olympic plan. So this would be really more a BC Games instead of one that's centered entirely around the city of Vancouver, but including everybody, something that would really be, almost spiritual, that unites people and also throws a bright shining light on the province from a tourism perspective. So the world would get to see the entire region. I said the other day, British Columbia is as big as France, Germany, and Britain combined. It's big. And so this is a chance to show everyone the full reach of what BC has to offer, the extraordinary geography, our incredible ability, our spirit, all of that, and make this something that really truly can touch everybody and make what was pretty darn good in 2010 even better.
That does seem to add some complexity, and it does bring me to the question about costs. So you have said a number of times today that no taxpayer money used for venue construction or capital costs. Yet there are more costs that beyond that, and particularly we're talking about the cost of security. So you did mention that there would need to be an agreement with government, and doing a little bit of research, you would have the figure much better than I would, but security costs were said to be quite significant in 2010, upwards of about $1 billion. So could you speak about security costs, and if this was a regional game, does that add additional costs that you haven't yet addressed?
A good question. So after Vancouver, and of course that was one of the great discussion points around the Vancouver Games, right up to and after. And I actually never seen the final accounting, but let's just say it was $1 billion. So when Calgary was submitting its credentials or building its credentials for 2026, it did an analysis of this and figured out a different way and a different approach. And it became acceptable to the IOC and others. And so their numbers were a little above half of the Vancouver numbers. So we believe the potential to change that model is there. And we think by regionalizing the project, in actual fact, it simplifies it. It means that there's not so much to try to secure in one large area. If you remember 2010, almost all of Vancouver was buttoned down. But with a spread out model, we think it will make it simpler, and it will allow us to try to solve these problems against local standards in local communities around the province. So we think but the federal government will have to do what the federal government has usually done for events like this, and that is support their commitment to providing the security apparatus for the games. Typically, the federal government has supported as many as two of these events every 10 years. We believe this event would qualify for that. So we think it's going in the right direction. We also have the expertise and learnings of 2010. So we see the potential to turn security into a far better story than it appeared to be for 2010.
So recognizing that there are costs for security and the fairly significant costs there, there's also the cost of the bid, though. And I think if I remember correctly, the 2010 bid committee was about $34 million was the budget for that. What would you see the budget being for a 2030 bid committee?
So, well, for starters, every bit of work that's been done so far has been done by volunteers. Many of the people working on this have been, sort of people who worked for the VANOC organizing committee who are continuing to work in the Olympic world. We believe, having done the calculations and zoned in and identified the areas where we will have to represent the case and reconfirm the kind of conditions, et cetera, that we can submit a bid for less than 10% of what the bid cost in 2010. This is also hugely advantageous to the overall reputation of the bid and of the future games. It demonstrates an ability to be able to do this work much more creatively, much less expensively. So our feeling is that, again, using the same sort of idea, we've done it once. We don't have to repeat what we've done before. We believe that we can assemble a bid at that level and also give the IOC a model that they could point to, that this can be done, this can be achieved. Bids have come down in cost. This would be the lowest, as we understand it, ever, and we believe we can pull that off. And it would be private sector funded.
Okay, so that addresses the cost, and I have some other questions, but I can see some of them coming in on Slido, so I do want to bring people into the conversation. We have several hundred people joining us today, so a lot of interest in this topic. And really talking about the timeline. So supporting hosting Vancouver suggests the COC won't be ready to talk about 2030 until after Tokyo or even Beijing. So what can you give us some ideas about the timeline and some of the next steps that might be involved?
Well, the process generally takes time. I mean, and if you actually look at our project, and if let's just assume for a second, we are a whole number of new communities. The amount of work and collaboration and time and commitment to all of that takes time. The Canadian Olympic Committee is fully preoccupied today with Japan and with Beijing. They are busy, very busy. So the goal here is to try to advance this so that when they come out of those two initiatives, that we are in a state of being as prepared as you can be before they engage. And so that's the goal. There's a ton of work to do this year. There's not a minute to waste. There's a tremendous amount of collaboration and consultation to go on, and we'll be lucky to be there in time. So that's the goal, is to kind of make this much easier for the COC when they're able to turn their attention fully to this and be done with the two Olympic Games that are in front of them.
So that's still a little ways away, John. What else is required to get it to that stage? Is it support that's needed from the City of Vancouver or other cities, the city or Whistler or the province or the feds? I mean, speak about that kind of stakeholder and government engagement and what's needed.
Well, first of all, I think that the single biggest lift this project will need is endorsement from the province. If the province endorses the idea that we can do a great good for the province, that we can meet a broader set of provincial needs, do something grand that involves everybody, that's a key part of this initiative. And so the goal will be to try to put this in front of the province. We are in a discussion with the province now, but to put this in front of the province in a way that they will see this as highly advantageous against a whole number of things, their own province-wide initiatives, for them to see this as a chance to really do something for, we have never actually tried anything like this as a province before, where the entire province comes together and acts as one to do something magnificent like this. And so to get the province excited about this we have absolutely no doubt, we're hearing from them every day, that communities will be excited to be part of this. What we hope to do is to kind of turn this into something that the province said, this is something we want to do together. This is something that could do a great good for the province. This could help us realize some of our own objectives. It might even help the province deliver on some of its own initiatives across the province in some of these communities and so on. So in that way, this project could really be something really powerful and really unique. But that is the key one. All of the others, we think, in time, a lot of work to do, but this is the one that I think is going to be the most important to the project.
And recently, Premier Horgan did say he was open to exploring this, so it sounds like there are discussions going on. I don't want to ignore the other incredibly important partner here, and you did mention it in your address and talking about the Indigenous partnerships that made this the 2010 Games so successful. And so it's actually a question on Slido as well, so I'll bring that question up. And you spoke specifically about a partnership in regards to First Nations around housing. So the question here is about, could a partnership be entered with First Nation developers, i.e. the Jericho lands, to fulfill the housing piece, so an Olympic Village 2.0?
So this is where the discussion started with us. We would heard some of these conversations going on, and we've had a few discussions early on with the city about potential here. And we thought that that was an opportunity. And given the First Nations participation and partnership track record in 2010, we saw this as a huge opportunity. And that partnership was profoundly positive. I mean, it was very enriching to the games. It was a difference maker. I think it gave the world a chance to see Canada through a very different light. It's something we can say about Canada that most countries can't say about itself. So we see that as the potential, but that will also, it'll be important for all of the key partners to somehow help bring that together. And if that were the outcome, and if we were able to deliver accommodation that could double as, a social housing legacy, for example, and a games athletes village, this would be the ultimate solution. But if we're not able to meet that objective, we can find a solution to the athletes village problem that we would have. But certainly the First Nations contribution to this could be profound.
So without the housing piece, I mean, how important still is Indigenous partnership at 2030 Games?
It's huge because, first of all, I think when you look back to 2010 and you see some of the things we achieved, I mean, we actually had a relationship with pretty well every First Nations community in the country, not just here. And, as Tawani Joseph reminds me all the time about, that our four host nations saw the VANOC partnership as the ideal model for bringing First Nations together in projects like this. And so we see First Nations engaged in all aspects, all of it, the way they were in 2010 and building on that. I mean, I look today at what's happening in First Nations and some of the businesses that they're involved in, the tourism that's been developed. These are all, legacies from what started back just before 2010. So we see this as hugely positive, and again, a difference maker for a bit or a story we would want to tell the IOC about why this idea to come back to Canada is so powerful.
And we're going to touch on that more with our panel discussion too. So thanks for that, John. Question here on Slido that if you use the existing venues from 2010, how would locations outside of Vancouver, Richmond, Whistler, and Cypress be utilized? What's your vision on that?
Sorry, I didn't.
If you're using some of the existing venues, then what would you see? Would there be venues at Sun Peaks or Big White or some
as
of the
it stands today? That's generally what we're saying is that there is a richness of venues across the province. So what we need also is, first of all, is willing communities. We need communities to have their own vision, and we need to see that they have a desire to participate. I've heard personally from a few communities who have told me they want in no matter what. But we have to go through a process of looking and seeing, what's the best way to put this together. We believe that we could end up with a project that could have as many as 8 or 9 communities in it. There's a ways to go there. We think the infrastructure is there. We think the facilities are there. Some communities may need a little bit of help or a little bit have to do a bit of work to get themselves to be what you would call Olympic ready. But we see it as being there. So, and this is part of the reason we're able to say we can go to this regional model, because there are facilities in the province better than some of the ones we used in 2010. That's a fact. And so we're in that situation of having the ability to be able to make really good choices.
So let's talk about competition now. Who else is in the running for 2030 Games? And there was a question on Slido that Hamilton was putting together a bid for 2030 Commonwealth Games. I don't see it on there now, so it's fallen below. But could Canada support both the 2030 Commonwealth Games and also 2030 Olympic Games? And then additionally, what other countries are bidding for 2030 Olympic Paralympic Games?
Well, the only arena that we're really paying a lot of attention to is who might bid against us. And we believe against those talking, and there's been some talk still in Japan at Sapporo, which we're not sure what might happen there. There's been talk in Spain. There's been some other discussions. Salt Lake for a while spoke about it, and then I think they've switched more to 2034. But we're trying to be the bid that everyone is scared of. We want to be the bid that when you look at it, you think why there's just no earthly reason why you would not go back to Canada when we have all of these ingredients. This could be the perfect model for future games. And so we're trying to just simply, be the best we can be. Worry about the competition when it comes. We also want to be a project in this country that is not causing big governments, to have to sidestep their other obligations to deal with us. We think we have solutions. We'd like to help. We'd like to help the provincial government and the federal government to bring about some transformation in areas that they'd like to see some things happen. So that's our project, and we're just doing our best today to be the very best project, to be the most electrifying, inspiring project we can be, so that anyone else who enters this race will know that going up against Canada is going to be incredibly difficult.
And understanding that there's the competition from outside of Canada, but I think the question there around a potential 2030 Commonwealth Games is a good one, because could Canada actually support both the Commonwealth Games and Olympic Paralympic Games in the same year? To me, that seems like it might not be possible, but what's your take on that?
Well, the questions that might be asked might be different, because I don't know, what the 2026 bid or 30 bid for the Commonwealth Games involves in the way of investments for stuff facilities. So it's hard to say. But I do know that the federal government, in previous conversations we've had, have said that, they have a willingness to entertain two projects of this type or size every 10 years. That may be an informal position. I don't know. But we think that's a decision that they would have to make. Originally, that bid was to be happening in 2026. We're just focused on us, and that's a determination that, and because Canada is so big, it may be possible to put regional evaluation on that and decide whether or not that what you just said is indeed possible. I don't know.
So going back now to I think the question, there are still a few questions coming in on Slido here about the bid process and what happens next. Could you talk to us a little bit about how that bid landscape has changed?
Well, it's changed a lot because, and this is part of the reason why we are excited, because if you take just the last 6 months, the IOC has just entered into a conversation with Brisbane for the 2032 games. There are a lot of other bidders, but somehow Brisbane got to the front of the line, and they're in negotiations that could result in them being, properly awarded at those games. That seems like a real possibility. We'd like to be in that position. We'd like to be that strong and that good, and we want to put the Canadian Olympic Committee in that position that we could open that kind of conversation with the IOC as representing the very best potential for all involved: the IOC, the COC, Canada, BC, our communities, First Nations, everybody. And so that's the goal. And the process for bidding has changed enough to allow various, results. Like if you look back to the 2024 award to Paris, well, 2 games were awarded that day, one to Paris, one to Los Angeles. Well, it was unprecedented. The Brisbane discussion's unprecedented. So we're looking at this and saying we want to be unprecedented if we can. So it's an opportunity. It's hard to say. It could turn into a traditional process. We hope not. And we're going to do, I think, certainly our group is going to do everything we can to continue to try to be an influence to get to the front of the line if we can.
Now, circling back to your comments and your vision around a regional games, there's a question here at the top of Slido looking for a little more clarification. You mentioned 8 or 9 communities. Do you really see that in the Metro Vancouver, Lower Mainland kind of region up to Fraser Valley, or could that even be broader? Prince George, Kamloops, some of the other areas of our province?
I don't think there are limits on where. I think what the limits are on what's there. And so we're not going to, I wouldn't insult a community today by saying who might qualify or who wouldn't. We're not qualified to say that yet. And I think what we hope that this will kick off a period of optimistic, hopeful thinking, and that communities will look at this and ask themselves, is this something they would like to be involved in? What we know, and the people on our team know, is that the facilities are there. And now if we can engage communities and create excitement in these various regions, then we have a chance to do something that's remarkably unprecedented for Canada and for BC. So we'll have to see. But I would say we're not willing to say that there's no part of the province that couldn't be used in some way for this. How this all shakes out, we don't know yet. But we certainly hope that there'll be a lot of interest, and that the tough choices will be picking between communities who want in.
Now, the big question, John, there is no question about your commitment and dedication and enthusiasm and passion for the 2010 games or even a 2030 bid. But are you going to be leading VANOC 2.0?
The answer to that is an absolute definitely no, and nor should I. I'd be 80 at the time. And here's the thing, VANOC left behind a legion of executive Olympic planning stars. We have terrific business leaders who have all lived this before. We actually have probably the richest, community in terms of assets for this that any community could possibly boast of. My goal here, and personal goal, and my family and my friends that are all working on this, is to do everything we can humanly do to get this to the goal line, so that we are actually in possession of this opportunity and that we can do something profound for the next generation and for our kids. But the talent is here. The leaders are here. And all I'm trying to do is to push it along and help any way I can to bring it to a realization. So I wouldn't, if anybody came looking for me, they wouldn't find me. Sorry.
So to use an Olympic analogy then, you are running with the torch, but you are ready to hand it off at the right time?
Absolutely. Yes. That you can write that one down.
John, we're out of time and we still have a panel that I want to get their perspectives on, but I thank you so much for laying out the vision and for carrying on with, carrying the torch, if you will. And really it's very clear that there is an opportunity here if a bunch of things come together and there is benefit to our region and to the province. So thank you, and I look forward to carrying on the discussion with you in the coming weeks and months.
Thank you, Bridget. And just to say to anyone who is wondering if there's something they can do, write to someone. Tell somebody you think it's a good idea if you think it's a good idea.
Great. Thanks so much, John.
This was fun. Thanks. Yeah.
Thanks.